over. So it's amazing to be here. Thanks so much, Anka, for the privilege of asking me to talk tonight. I know all of us has got a very busy schedules between work and kids and everyone. So I really hope that all of you learn something this evening to help your child a little bit, or to even just understand him a little better. So I'm an occupational therapist. I qualified about 12 years ago. I've worked in the medical field, and then most of my career I worked in education, and currently I'm in private practice. I'm SI qualified, sensory integration qualified, so that is what the talk will be about this evening. Yeah, I'm not sure, I can't see the chats, but if there's any questions, I think I will handle it afterwards one by one. Okay, Anka, next slide is fine. Okay, so first we're going to talk about sensory modulation. Now, sensory modulation is a big part of sensory integration. Anka, next slide is fine. We look at our senses. So we've got 5 senses. That is the senses we all know of. We can see, we can hear, we can smell, we can taste, and we can touch. That's the 5 senses all of us learned when we were still at school. But in occupational therapy, we also look at 2 other senses, which is our vestibular system, or our movement system. And that's how we perceive movement. Do we like movement? Don't we like movement? Do we like movement too much, maybe? Or are we really scared of movement? So that is our 6th sense. And then we also look at proprioception, which is our body map. And it's very important for us and a child especially to know where he is in space. Just think of an example where you are stuck in town and you don't know where to go, and you call your husband and you ask him, listen, where should I go? His first question is going to be, but where are you? Because if he doesn't know where you are, he won't be able to direct you. So it's really important to know where we are in space, because if we don't know where we are, then it's really going to be difficult to know where things are in relation to each other. And therefore, things like a B goes this side and D goes that side is not going to make sense for us. So we receive information through these 7 senses all day long, and then the information is sent to the brain. Now, how the brain handles this information is really important. Okay, Anka, next slide. So we classify children in 3 sensory profiles, and not only children fits into these profiles. All of us has a sensory system and fits more or less into one of these 3 profiles. First, you get the sensory underreactive child. They are the children that doesn't seem to register sensory input. They, for example, has got very high pain thresholds. They are the children in class that is daydreamers. They are the quiet and more reserved children and just goes with the flow. Sometimes the teacher will tell me, listen, I just need to make a little bit of fire under this child's bum, because he's so underreactive towards sensory information. Then you get children who is overreactive towards sensory information. They respond much quicker and much more intensive to sensory input. That is the children in which you see tactile sensitivities, the children that can't wear anything because their skin is wiggly under the clothes, or that is the children that the labels must be cut out. Those are the children that usually is picky eaters because they don't like different textures in their mouths. They are the children that usually don't like movement, so they are scared of jungle gyms. They don't like going onto swings and slides and stuff. I currently have a little guy in therapy who's so auditory, like hearing sensitive, that he cannot at all write with a pencil because the sound of the pencil is so irritating to his ears that he cannot cope with it at all. So he's overreactive towards auditory information. So these children are overstimulated very quickly. Then the last profile is a sensory seeker, and I think all of us knows this type of child. This is the very energetic energizer bunnies. They are always on the go, and they usually give their mums and parents and dads and so on grey hair because they always want to go fast and high, and they are the risk takers of the group. So we can usually classify children in these three groups, and it's not a problem to fall under one of these sensory profiles as long as you are functional in class and you can regulate yourself well. Okay, Anka, next slide. So our body basically works like a car speedometer. We have to regulate all this information from all our 7 senses according to the situation. So when we are happy and when we are able to learn and when we feel comfortable, we are in the yellow and the orange zone. Then we function well, we can learn, we can listen to mommy and daddy, we can listen to the teachers. But when I'm overstimulated and when I'm overwhelmed with all the sensory information from my senses, then I function from, let me just see, is it possible for a child to have 2 of these? Yes. So to answer your question, sorry to interrupt myself there, I will continue about the car speedometer later. Our 7 senses can fall. It's not necessarily that all the senses fall into one system, but we usually see a cluster in one sense. So for instance, you can be auditory sensitive, but movement or vestibular seeking. And that is not uncommon, you get that, but most of the time, most of your senses fall into one system. Okay, coming back to the car speedometer, so we have to be able to regulate sensory information. If that doesn't happen properly, then our car speedometer goes into the red zone. And then we also function, and a child function not from his cognitive brain, but from his primitive brain. And then you get that fight, flight, or freeze mode they go into. And that's a dangerous zone to get into because then you don't learn anymore. You only fight or you flight or you freeze. Okay, Anka, next slide. So obviously, if you think about it, our ability to successfully regulate our sensory information has a huge impact on concentration. That little guy who cannot handle the sound of the pencil is constantly sitting like this. And each time he starts writing, he closes his one ear to be able to cope with the sound of the pencil. So he's so over-focused on this sound that irritates him that he doesn't properly listen to the teacher and he misses instructions, and that impacts on his concentration and his performance in class. When I'm overstimulated, I usually are emotional. I cry easily, I'm easily frustrated, we see temper tantrums. So when a child functions from that red zone, the primitive brain, then we get the meltdowns of the children. And that is where we as parents come in to prevent the child from going from the yellow to the orange to the red zone, because we must see the signs and symptoms before they move into the red zones so that we can help them to regulate back to the yellow and the orange areas. Thank you, Anka. Okay, so here the presentation, you will see the slides is based on teachers. I will speak, you can read through the tips for the teachers as well. I'm going to focus my talk more on parents. It obviously correlates quite a lot, but my tips will be more for parents at home. So general tips is understand your child and understand the profile your child has, because if you understand why a child wants to move excessively, or why a child doesn't like different textures, or why a child is overstimulated when he comes home, then you will know how to handle him better. also understand your own sensory profile. I'm a mom too, and I fall under that overreactive profile. So if I come home in the evening and I'm a bit overstimulated, I'm easily irritated. I fight with my children easier. So if you understand your own profile, then you will also understand yourself better. And it's also interesting to work with parents, because if parents understand each other, a mom and a dad, each other's profiles, then you can also understand your partner better and understand why he reacts as he does. Structure and routine is very important. A child likes predictability, likes to know what to expect, and he likes to know how to handle things. Sorry, is someone asking something? No. Okay, sorry, I don't know what I was saying. But structure, routine, and predictability is quite important. Less is more. There is so many things going on in our lives these days that children are easily overstimulated. They go to school, they go to play ball, they do gymnastics, they do horse riding, they do all this stuff, but everything they do gives stimulation and might be overstimulating. Be consequent. Your yes is your yes and your no is your no. Again, it comes back to structure and routine and predictability, that the child knows what is expected of him. Then consider a sensory corner. You can create a sensory corner in your house. I always call it a safe space for the child when he's overstimulated. So what I did at my home, which worked amazingly, is I went to Crazy Store and I bought a little small tent. And in that tent, I put stuff like books, music that is soft, weighted blankets or weighted toys, stuff that regulates and help the child to calm down. So if you see your child is overstimulated, send him to the sensory corner. It's not a naughty corner, it's a sensory corner to help him calm down. Okay, you can go over, Anka. If we look at the vestibular system in detail, I just quickly want to read this question. From what age can you do the sensory corner? Well, actually from very young. Think of, I know many people as a naughty chair, and that we use from very young. A child can start understanding when he's overstimulated, and that's, sorry, I'm talking about dermakaar here, but as from when a baby is born, he's got the sensory system and he gets overstimulated. If you think of the terrible twos, that is where the emotions is heightened. So I think as soon as the child will be able to use the sensory corner or the sensory room or whatever functionally, and it is a space for him to calm down, as little as 2, I would say that can work. Coming back to the vestibular system, how to use the vestibular system to calm a kid down. A child that wants to move must be allowed to move. Obviously, there's a difference between constructive movement and deconstructive movement or uncontrolled movement. If you think of free play, there's a lot of uncontrolled wild movement, whereas to look at constructive movement, it will be more movement that has a direct or a specific plan behind it. So if you look at movement and how to encourage movement in a child, and remember, if you think of a sensory seeker that wants movement, it's important to give him movement, because if he doesn't move, he's going to get frustrated and he's going to get angry and he's going to be all over. If you think of a child that's overreactive to movement, he still needs movement to develop body muscles and to develop his brain. So movement is always good. It doesn't matter whether it's a seeker or an underreactor or an overreactor. It just depends on the type and the extent of the movement. So when you expect a child, especially a preschool child, because they need so much movement, but there is times they need to sit still. They need to sit still in class. They need to sit still in a car. They need to sit still in church service or whatever. So then give them movement through little things. For instance, Keep their hands busy. Give them a ball of press stick to work with. Give them bubble wrap. Give them, please don't give them bubble wrap in the church. That might be chaos. But if you drive, give them bubble wrap to pop. Give them paper clips to attach and unattach. Give them a stress ball. All the China malls or the China shops these days are full of fidget toys. Fidget toys is good, except if it distracts a child. If you think of bath time at home, allow your child to play in the bath. Give him syringes to pull up water and pull it back, burst it out. Throw water from one cup to the other. All of that is activities that includes movement. When a child is expected to do homework, I know most of the children obviously is preschool children, they don't get homework yet, but they're going to get there where they go get homework. Give them something to sit on. On the slide there's a nice photo of a disco seat. It's a seat with a cushion with air in, where a child can still move his bum although he's expected to sit still. Put a stretchy band in between the front legs of a chair, so that he can use his legs to move. So give movement breaks. If you see a child is not concentrating and not focusing, tell him to stand up and do 10 jumping jacks or push the wall or whatever. Movement breaks, it's good, and it helps to regulate the brain. Then if you think of outside play, anything that you can think of doing outside would be great. Rollerblading, gardening. Gardening is an amazing activity for children to get in movement, and also proprioceptive feedback, which we will talk about a bit later. Things like pushing a wheelbarrow. Imagine how much strength and effort goes into pushing a wheelbarrow. Playing in sand, playing on a jungle gym with slides, on monkey bars with merry-go-rounds. Swimming, biking, hiking, jogging, skipping rope, jumping on a trampoline. A trampoline is an amazing toy or equipment which gets a lot of movement in. Games like Ringa Ringa Roses, hopscotch, wheelbarrow walking, tug-of-war, all of that is games that includes a lot of movement. Indoors, we can look at things like a rocking chair. A child can sit on a rocking chair to get that very linear calming down movement in. A hammock, if you've got that at home. Cushion fights. Cushion fights is fun for the whole family, and it gets that child so much movement. Build an obstacle course. Use your chairs, use your tables, use your couches, use old mattresses. Build a big obstacle course for a child at home so that he can move. Kids yoga is also amazing. Dance. Put some music on and dance around. Play games like Simon Says. Do different animal walks. Tell your child, if you've got a nice long area, tell him to jump like a frog, or hop like a bunny, or sail like a snake. House chores is also a nice thing to get movement in. You can ask the child to sweep the floor, to mop the floor, to wipe the table, to hang the clothes. All of that encourage movements. What children that usually is seeking likes to go upside down, so you can allow them to lie upside down and watch TV. You can jump on a mini trampoline. You can sit on a gym ball. All of that you can still do. You know, if you've got your screen time, then you can include that with movement to get them moving. Extramural activities that is really important and good for movement is stuff like swimming, karate, gymnastics, and horse riding. Okay, Anka, next slide. Okay, now we look at the proprioceptive system. Remember, our proprioceptive system is the ability to know where we are in space. Any activity that includes pushing, pulling, heavy work, or strength is a proprioceptive activity. Proprioceptive activities and vestibular, which is the movement system activities, usually overlap. But this is the system that we use to calm us down. Deep pressure or hard work activities or against gravity activities is very important. In class, we usually suggest that the child uses a weighted equipment like a weighted lap pad or a weighted vest or a weighted backpack. It gives them that security and that hard work and the deep pressure they need to regulate the system. At home, we can, for instance, get a weighted blanket that you can order from specific places that the child can sleep under, and weighted equipment calms the system. Use a stress ball or press stick because you have to really work hard to press those things. An ear massage like this gives nice proprioceptive feedback through the ears. Allow chewing gum. Our mouth area has got lots of proprioceptors, and if we allow, what do we do? What do I do if I'm emotional and overstimulated? I like to eat, and the reason being is I get lots of proprioceptive feedback through my mouth. So if I give a child chewing gum to chew on, it helps them to regulate the sensory information and their emotions. Involve them in the kitchen, help them, ask them to help you peel the oranges or peel the or mash the potatoes, because that gives nice and strong hard work. Any blowing or sucking activities, again through the mouth, gives lots of proprioceptive feedback to calm the system, like blowing bubbles or drinking through a very thin straw. You can drink yogurt through a thin straw. You can drink juice through a thin straw, which gives lots of proprioceptive feedback through the mouth. Then give your child hugs and teach him to give himself a nice big bear hug. Massage is good. We also in therapy, if a child is in therapy with us, we consider the brushing program where we give a specific program to them where the mother have to brush the child, which also has got a lot of proprioceptive feedback. And also, if you can play something like hide and seek where they have to crawl into tight spaces, it gives lots of proprioceptive feedback. Okay, Anka, next slide. Then we look at the tactile system. I just spoke about the brushing protocol. There, the top picture, you can see how the brush looks. Usually it's only in therapy that we do this part. So it's usually for children that is very tactile sensitive, and it helps the system to calm down. It's where you brush the child with a specific brush, and then on the hands, on the back, and on the legs to help the system calm down. Again, yeah, use bath time to incorporate the tactile system to help the child regulate. Let him play with bubbles and shaving cream and bath foam to expose him to different tactile, different textures. Paint, for instance, in the bath, paint the child with the water and a paintbrush. It gives lots of tactile input. When you're done with bath time, dry the child slowly and firmly like a massage so that you can calm his system down. Also, especially for the overreactors to tactile input, expose them to different textures, but don't overstimulate them. So we have to push them if they are oversensitive to tactile information. We have to expose them to different textures, but not in such an extent that we push them into the red zone. Slow and less is more, remember? Okay. Outside play, remember, gardening is lovely for the tactile system. Putting those hands into the ground in the mud is good for the tactile system. Play in sand, bake mud cakes, walk barefoot. You get lots of tactile feedback through your feet if you are barefoot. Play with clay, play with finger paint and water games. All of this is amazing for the tactile system. If you look at what you can do indoors for the tactile system, you can play games like dress up. Give your child your clothes to dress up with. Every time you dress up, you stimulate the tactile system, which will desensitize it. Play hide and seek. I mentioned it before, where you have to crawl into tight spaces. Draw on your child's back with your finger so that you can guess what it is. Do some face painting to desensitize the child. Do sand art. Hide under blankets and read a story with a torch. They love building a fort under a blanket and crawl into that and read stories with us. So modulation, to conclude, is basically how we take in sensory information and how we process in sensory information and whether we are functional. If we are functional and if a child is functional, that is okay to be under either one of the three profiles. But as long as he cannot regulate himself and that affects his concentration, that he can't listen or sit still in class, he's so seeking that he can't sit still, or he's so overreactive that the pencils sound irritate him, then we have to seek for help. And the teacher and the teacher and the parent have to help the child regulate. Okay, Anka, I think you're going to have to skip some slides now, and we are going over, you can go on to motor planning. Yes. Okay, another part of sensory integration. Let me just ask, so far, is there any other questions which I missed maybe? It doesn't look like it. Okay, so I think we can go on. Praxis is another name for motor planning. Now, motor planning is an unconscious ability to plan motor act. So for this to happen successfully, we must first have an idea of what to do, and then of how to do it, and then of you actually have to do it and check whether it worked. It requires knowledge of actions and objects, motivation and intention of the part of the person. So for an example, I stood on a playground with a teacher the other day, and one of the boys kicked a ball onto the jungle gym. So the teacher said, please take off the ball of the jungle gym. So this was basically a problem solving situation for the child. So the ball was quite high. How do I get it off? Now I have to plan to get that ball off. So first what I need is to create ideas on how to get this ball off. Then I have to execute one of the ideas. And then I have to evaluate this. Did this idea work, or should I have another idea? Now, what this boy did was really interesting to me. So the ball was on top of the jungle gym and he was here at the bottom. So first he started shaking the jungle gym to try to get the ball off. Now this obviously didn't work, because he obviously couldn't shake the jungle gym well enough to actually make the ball move. Then he tried to jump up and down to get the ball, but obviously he's too short, so he couldn't get the ball. Then he tried to push it through the ropes of the jungle gym, which also didn't work because it was too big. And all he actually had to do is he had to climb up the ladder and fetch the ball. But because his motor planning was so poor, he had ideas. He had the first step. He shook the jungle gym. He jumped up and down and then tried to push it through the small spaces. But he couldn't figure out what is the best plan to get this ball off. So his ideas were there, but following through with that ideas were really difficult. So skills that are very important in motor planning are task initiation. We have to be able to start the task. Then task completion, we have to actually be able to do the task. And then task evaluation, we must check that what I did now, did it actually work, or should I try something else? It's a lot of problem solving skills. It's a lot of creating of ideas. And it's also the ability to adjust in novel situations. Now, this also have a major impact on my emotions and my behavior. That child who couldn't get the ball down from the jungle gym got so frustrated and so mad and so angry because he couldn't get the ball down. And imagine if your planning is poor in every little task you do, you're going to be frustrated and emotional and angry or emotional about everything, because as soon as the teacher gives you a task that you haven't done before and that needs that step by step um, um, planning, you are going to be frustrated because you won't be able to follow through on the activity. Now, how can I, as a parent, help my child to plan better? It's always important to break a task down for a child into simpler steps. I always explain it like this. If I come into the kitchen and the basin is full of dishes, I'm like, oh my word, I don't know where to start. Whereas, and then what I do is I cluster the dishes. I first put all the glasses together, then I put all the cutlery together, then I put all the plates together. So what am I doing? I'm breaking this task for myself down into steps so that I can first start with the first step, first start with the second step, and then the third step. So help if you see your child gets frustrated with a big activity or your activity, help him break it down into simpler steps and help him just to start. Usually when you help a child to start somewhere, it's easier for him to carry on. Avoid doing for the child. Now, I'm a mother too. We tend to do for our children and not to do with the child. So it's one thing to put a child's shoes on, whereas it is another thing of helping a child or guiding a child to put his own shoes on. So we have to allow a child to make mistakes, to try over and over, even though it's frustrating, because if we always do for a child, he will never be able to be independent and do for himself. So independence is really important from a young age. And if you master something that is difficult, that feeling of empowerment is so great that it's much better than when mommy does it for me. Allow a child to make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes. That is how we learn. If I made a mistake, I've learned from it. When mommy is doing for me, then it's much more difficult to learn from it. Give a child responsibilities. Give him house chores. Set up a plan of your responsibility is to give the dog food or to wash the dishes. If you give a child responsibility, he learns independence and he learns to take control of the situation. Always praise good efforts. Even if a child chose the wrong idea or his idea didn't work out, always praise him for the effort and help him to take the next step. So that is motor planning. It's got a huge impact on our emotions, on our behavior, on our concentration, because if we are not independent, obviously with age, within our age, then it's frustrating and we don't believe in ourselves and it affects our self-esteem. Okay, so when do we consider occupational therapy, or when do we refer to occupational therapy, or when do I as a parent consider taking myself to an occupational therapist? Okay, Anke, you can go to the next slide. You can go on and on and on. And last one, yes. Okay, so when we spoke about modulation, so the ability to regulate sensory information, and we also spoke about motor planning, when I cannot plan in a novel situation. If it affects a child to such an extent that it affects him in school with his schoolwork, or he cannot cope in class, or his teacher says he cannot cope in class, or at home where he has so many temper tantrums and meltdowns and you don't know how to handle him, it's a good idea to take him for a full assessment to an occupational therapist. Also, when you want to understand your child better, when we see the children for a assessment, we have an interview with the parent and we let the parent fill in a sensory profile to determine in which profile a child lies so that we know how to understand him better. It's not always only a clear occupational therapy problem. There's also other professionals to refer to, like the speech therapist, the play therapist, the educational psychologist. Even in extreme cases, we refer to neurologists or psychiatrists. So it's basically a team effort to understand and to help whether it's purely an emotional problem or is it more a sensory integration problem. So yeah, that's it from my side. I will, if there's any questions from your side, I will be more than happy to answer it.
Feel free to unmute or raise your hand and we can ask. I'll stop sharing screen now. Thank you so much. That was lovely and quite a lot of information, a lot of practical advice. I'm curious if anybody else would like to share their experience in class or at home, or any ideas of things they have tried before or what works for them. There's a question from Jocelyn. Is there a questionnaire that we can access to loosely profile our kids?
The questionnaires we give out is usually, we use the sensory profile. You can also use the sensory profile measure. That is only OTs use that questionnaires, but there is also a part that the teacher can fill in. I think I don't know of a specific questionnaire that you can just dish out to a parent to basically decide which profile a child fits into. But if you understand the profile, I think you can tick boxes like a child which is very energetic, which takes risk, which is always on the go, which doesn't have any safety awareness. That would be a seeker, whereas an overreactor would be the one that's super sensitive to sound, that's super sensitive to movement, that's super sensitive to tactile, whereas the underreactor is the child that usually we miss because they are always in the corner. So I think if you understand the characteristics of each profile, it will help you to cluster in more or less on a specific profile. But there's not necessarily a questionnaire that you can use as a teacher now. I hope I answered your question. Please, can you send the recording? I think we can do that also.
So, and
thank you. That does answer my question. Sorry, I was just in the room with my kid. I couldn't talk then.
Okay, did it answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
I see a raised hand. Mangele has a question. Would you like to ask, please?
Thank you. Is it possible that a child, the sensors at home will be different from school? I'll make an example. Let's say at school you hear something totally different about the child than what you hear at home, and you get really confused because it's like immediately when it gets to school it becomes a total stranger. I don't know how to put it, but yeah, it's possible.
I understand completely your question. I think we have to look at school and at home at two totally different situations and settings. So at school, there's a lot of sensory information. There's lots of other kids, so the sound is much more. The visual input is much more because usually the classes are busy. There's lots to see. The sound is more. The movement is much more because there's so many things going on around me. So usually at school, the sensory input is much more than at home, where it's more quiet, when I've got my own space. I don't have 20 brothers and sisters around me. So the possibility of a child being overstimulated overstimulated at school is much higher than at home. But saying that, usually we cope in a circumstance or a situation where there's lots of people. And then I go home where it's my safe space. My mom, my dad, my siblings is my safe space. And then all the wheels come off. And then you see the temper tantrum. And that's sometimes when I don't know what's the case with your child, but sometimes the school is fine. The child reacts and acts at school fine. But as soon as he comes home, then all the temper tantrums come, and he's emotional and he's crying and he's not okay. Because that is his safe space, and that is where he can let go. You know, he can just be himself. Whereas at school, he's coping because he knows he has to. Or is it the other way around, maybe?
Actually, the other way around.
So he's not coping at school, but he's coping at home.
I wouldn't say not coping per se, but
Yeah.
we used to hear a lot of those
Yeah.
that suggests that it seems
Remember
not
at school, as I said, there's a lot of sensory input, and also a lot of things that needs to be done. So there's a lot of expectations from a child at school. He's expected to write, he's expected to cut, he's expected to paint, he's expected to play. And I know the Montessori school system allows a child a lot to do what he wants at that moment, but there's still some sort of expectations from the child. So when the child is then overstimulated easily, for instance, if he's tactile sensitive, a thing like gluing or finger paint might be too much for his system, and then his behavior, he overreacts, or he hits his friend, or he screams or whatever, because he cannot handle all of those sensory input that the teacher expects from him.
Thank you.
Does it make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Anything else?
Jocelyn has a raised hand. Maybe she would like to ask the question.
So my daughter is the opposite. So she's fine at school.
Mhm.
And then when she gets home, we have like absolute epic meltdowns all the time throughout the week. So she's only at school for 2 days, but it's still, so she can be. So what advice would you give, like, to help her regulate when we get home, to help her transition so that we're not having to deal with 40-minute tantrums when we get home?
Yeah. What do you do just after when she comes home in the afternoon? How does your routine or your rhythm, or how does your afternoon look like?
So we normally pick her up and she has lunch, and then she's only 2.5, so she'll have some breastfeeding and a nap. So she is getting contact and downtime from them, but it's still often when she wakes up, she'll just wake up and she'll be like beyond beside herself.
Do you put a screen on, like TV or a tablet or anything when she comes home? No. Okay, so that's very good.
We don't do any screen time.
Okay, that's really good. That's very good. When she sleeps, does she sleep? You said she's 2.5. Do you wrap her in some type of blanket?
She doesn't like to be wrapped, but I have started to put a bit of a weighted blanket on her, and I'm not really sure. But then when I started with the weighted blanket, she started with nightmares, and I've taken the weighted blanket off. Yeah.
Okay, that's also interesting. Yeah, I think you should then ask what is it every day like this? Is it a usual
It's calmed
thing?
down now, but it can. So it normally goes through like 2 or 3 week cycles. Like 2 weeks very intense, and then it like calms down a little bit, and then but yeah.
It's very interesting. Powerful vestibular movement input and proprioceptive input can last for up to 8 hours. That's very interesting. So usually when I, for instance, evaluate a child, I say to the parents, this child was fine in the room and he was coping during the assessment, but please check him for me the rest of the evening until tomorrow, whether he's then got sensory meltdowns. Because sometimes children has delayed responses, so he's fine at school, but when he comes home, then the responses come out. So it might be that is it a little girl?
Yeah.
Okay, so it might be that the day is a little bit busy for her, and she struggles to regulate all the information that she's got in, but she keeps it together at school, and then you only see the aftermath when she comes home. So use the sorry, did you want to ask a question?
I was just asking if it can last from one day to another, because sometimes those tantrums are like, if it's not a school day, they can be at like 9 o'clock in the morning, after breakfast, after, you know, a very calm environment.
Yeah, as I say, up to 8 hours after a powerful input, it can last up to that long. If she's got a little bit of delayed responses, and you must use the proprioceptive system, that system where there's pushing, pulling, hard work against gravity, because that calms the system. So maybe a brushing protocol for her would be excellent, but just deep massage can also work. Massage a little body with maybe a little bit of oil, wrapping her into a blanket to calm her down, giving her big hugs to calm her down. Let her eat, I'm not sure how a diet looks, but let her eat crunchy food like carrots, or drink yogurt through a straw, or wine gums. Oh, she's a bit small for wine gums, but powerful proprioceptive through the mouth also usually works to calm down. So you can maybe look at what you give her for lunch. For example, maybe instead of bread, just normal bread, toasted bread, because it's more crunchy, or give her a Provita to eat instead of a piece of bread. Give her raw carrots to eat instead of a banana, which is soft. So you can also give her lots of proprioceptive feedback through the mouth to help her to calm the system down. I don't know if she's still using a dummy or a dookie or that
No,
sort of.
she was very attached to her dummy before.
Yes.
So that does make sense.
Yeah. So we you can replace that with something. You get toys or a necklace actually with a rubber thingy onto it, which a child can chew. So you can substitute the dummy, because you obviously used it as a regulating mechanism to help her calm down, by adjusting a diet maybe, or give that proprioceptive feedback. The weighted blanket, I'm not sure if you know, but you know that the weighted blanket shouldn't be too heavy. It should only be 10%
No, it was
of
just
the weight.
yes, it was just a crochet blanket, so
Okay.
it wasn't super heavy. It was just
Okay.
something heavier than a normal blanket. Yeah.
What I use with my own children, which works really well, is a sleeping bag. So they climb inside a sleeping bag, so it's not as heavy, but it wraps their whole body. So it also gives night proprioceptive feedback. And I somewhere put soft toys on top of them and tell them all of them wants to snuggle up with them, to also help to calm the system.
That's helpful, thank you.
Yeah, soft white noise music also calms the system. What you can also use is movement. You get 3 types of movements. You get linear movements, which is either forward, backward, or sideways. Then you get the rotation, spinning around, and then you get inversion, which is upside down. Now, linear movement, which is this or this, is very calming. So when you put her to sleep, or before you put her to sleep, rock in a chair or keep her in your arms and rock her, because linear movement also calms the system. So it shouldn't be all over. It should be really calming movement. Dance with her, or swing with her. If you have got a swing at home, to swing her in the swing also will help to calm the system.
Thank you so much. That's very, very helpful.
Okay, I'm glad.
I hope it was helpful for other people too, not just for me.
I see there's a thumbs up, so that's good. I think, let me just check if there's more questions.
I see some requests for the recording, and for anybody else who would like the recording, please just send us an email at info@hatfieldmontessori.coza, and we'll be happy to share that with you, or when we have it available.
I think that's all the questions, Anke, or am I missing something?
I think that's all the questions. That there's a lot of thank yous. There's a lot of, we appreciate it because we learned so much. So actually, that's quite a lot to learn and quite a lot of information. So I think maybe just sitting down and watching this presentation again and processing the information will be very helpful. One last call, if anybody has any comments or any more questions, would love to hear it. I know there's load shedding in some parts that just started 5 minutes ago. So constantly looking, thinking maybe people will disappear. Thank you for everyone for joining us. It's quite a beautiful crowd of, I think all of us are parents, or most of us are parents, but also lots and lots of teachers, or parents and teachers at the same time, from all parts of South Africa. And there's so much to learn about our own children and how to work with them at school and at home and how to help them. And we always welcome these kind and thoughtful and well thought presentations that can just give us practical ideas of what to do. And so thank you again. I've really written down things about structure and routine and sensory corner at home, and I loved how you blended it so beautifully with Montessori. It's basically a lot of chores and responsibility and independence and helping the child be independent and do things for themselves, and not do things for themselves. Some people call that tough love, but it's us parents trying to go through allowing the child to struggle, allowing the child to repeat, to do things. So thank you for that. Thank you for mentioning that. I think it's always important to be reminded and to know that we're actually helping the children when we do that, and the struggle will be worth it at the end. Be looking forward to hearing from all of you. If you have comments, please email us. If you'd like to hear more from Grethe, I'll be happy to share her contact. That's okay. And we'll be looking forward to seeing you at our next talk in about 6 weeks from now. Montessori theory, yes. Montessori theory weaves into your work, Grethe, and all of the occupational therapists. So it's quite beautiful to see how Montessori actually saw her work as natural development of the child, and you do the same. So Montessori is nothing unusual. It's just education for life. It's just how to help humans live well together and regulate.
Be the best them they can be. Hey?
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Anke. I will email you the presentation. So sorry about